Okay, in this video, I'm going to present and analyze a chapter, an article by Dr. Moen, and the title of the chapter is Are Psychedelic Drugs Distorting? Now, I searched this on Google and came across this Reddit post where I guess Dr. Moen was advertising the chapter, and one user thought responded the question as follows: do you think people take psychedelics to feel normal? Of course they are distorting. Thank you, Bison Sashimi. Anyways, so in response to this, I think we should, on behalf of Dr. Moen, I think we should say that the main idea of this book, of this chapter, is that changes to experiences aren't necessarily distortions. So by the end of this video, hopefully you'll be able to understand what I mean by that. So Dr. Moen doesn't give us a definition differentiating between changes to experiences and distortions. But I think the idea is as follows. Take the sorts of experiences you have during your typical waking consciousness and compare that to an experience you would have under psychedelics. There's definitely a difference. Besides that, do we get a distortion, which you might then understand as a misrepresentation of reality, right? So another way to put the question is, are psychedelic drugs misrepresenting reality? Okay, so now the main argument that Dr. Moen's going to go and use is just to go through those examples and show that in reality we have change or alterations, but not necessarily misrepresentations of reality. And a very common one is just a change in the way the color looks to you, right? So suppose you see a leaf and it just looks extremely green, or maybe even like so green that like now it just looks like a completely different color altogether. You see all these sorts of textures. I don't know, just change it as much as you can imagine. The question is that a distortion of reality? And here the answer is, well, unless you think that your normal human way of perceiving that leaf is the only correct way to perceive that, then unless you think that, then it's not really clear why this psychedelic way of experiencing it should constitute a distortion, right? So just think about how other animals see the world. Just think about a bee, like the way a bee has to like learn about leaves and plants and its environment is going to be completely different than the way you do. And think about a bat flying through the world at nighttime using its echolocation. That's going to present a leaf way different than the way it looks to you. But does that mean it's a distortion in reality? Not automatically. Also, just imagine that realize that the way we've come to perceive plants around us is part of our evolutionary history. And that history could have been completely different, and we could have been species with very different perceptual systems. Would that mean that we then distorted what we see? And Dr. Moen says, not very likely. Okay, now how about this idea of like mixing sensory modalities? So this idea of like you hear colors, or like due to psychedelics, you see music in color, right? Is that a distortion? And here I'm reminded of this very early Windows media player. I couldn't find the exact one I had growing up, but it was something like this, some sort of like some just sort of like lights moving around, just like at some random oscillation relevant to whatever track you were listening to. Okay, so is this a distortion? And again, Moen says this is distortion only if you think that music vibrations are intrinsically auditory. And so if you think about it, music is just what's out there in the world. It's just a collection of sort of vibrations of some sorts or another, right? Some sort of waves through the air. And sure, we represent them in certain ways. We represent them through our ears, and that has a certain experience in us. But Moen says, why should that be the only true, correct way to represent music. As a matter of fact, it's not. I mean, scientists could represent that with a sort of a wave. And so, again, it's not clear that a change to your experience is automatically a distortion of it. All right, how about these ideas of like enhanced beauty, or this idea that, so you're looking at a flower, and this part's kind of funny. Like Dr. Moen says, imagine the flower on a beauty scale you would normally rank as a 4 out of 10, but now you look at this flower and it's like a 20 out of 10. Right? Is that a distortion? And here, I think you can more easily imagine what's going to happen here. So if there's an objective fact about beauty, about the beauty of the flower, this is kind of the why giving it a 4 out of 10 kind of is silly. There's not a real scale out there. There's no beauty scale. And so just the fact that it appears more beautiful to me doesn't constitute a distortion of reality, unless you think that there's this objective feature in there that I'm missing out on. And something similar with love and trust, right? So now imagine on psychedelics, you find humanity extra worthy of love, and you become super trusting. I think I was reading an article earlier. You can never love too much, right? Is this a distortion? Well, surely there might be some inconvenient things that happen, right? Your ways of loving and your ways of trusting may not match customary ways of interacting. So you might be so trustworthy that people can take advantage of you, or you might be so loving that you seem weird or quirky or something like that. But the point is that this is a sort of a socially constructed thing, and society could, and all of us, change and just be more loving, right? These are all social constructs. And so Dr. Moen's point is there's not necessarily a misrepresentation going on, but although there might be a sort of mismatch between you and the way society acts. All right, so then Moen has this conclusion of what might be going on, and Moen identifies it to this view called naive realism. And one way to put it is that what the naive realist thinks, that the way we see the world is the way it actually, as a matter of fact, is. So look at the red on my jacket and imagine that the red you're seeing is, as a matter of fact, the sort of red that is here. There's no sort of interpretation on your part, from your mind, from your cognitive system onto the world. You're just seeing sheer nature of reality, just as it is. Most philosophers and scientists have come to just straight out reject naive realism. But if you're a naive realist, then yeah, any sort of change to your current perception is going to be a distortion, because your current perception is the correct way of perceiving reality. One point Moen makes here is that it might be that our current ways of perceiving it might be distorting it, and psychedelic experience might have a counterbalancing effect. Okay, so then I actually want to make a quick point of analysis, right? So I grant that there are multiple ways to represent sensory data. And so here, I found a YouTube video advertising these sunglasses. Basically, this person is blind, and that camera takes in data from the visual environment and makes a pattern on his tongue. And based on that pattern on his tongue, he can then sort of predict what's in front and around him and start interacting with the world, right? And so this is a great illustration of Moen's point, that sort of there's the stuff out in the world and the different ways we can represent it, all right? But not all ways of representing the world are going to constitute knowledge. Suppose we're out in the savannah and you see a lion, but I see big cupcake, right? A big cupcake coming towards us. You're gonna run, and I'm gonna go and eat the cupcake because I'm hungry. Sure, I can represent a lion as a big cupcake, but I think we should admit that that's not a good way to represent it, and that's not going to lead me to knowledge. All right, so we need to answer the question: what makes one representation knowledge and another not? And this is a huge question in epistemology. There's no way to answer it in one class or in one lecture. But here's one suggestion. My representation of something, we have freedom, right? We might have more than one way to represent it, but at the very least, it should allow for some interaction with the environment and other representation. So just think about the point we made earlier about perception, right? So there's bats, the way a bat looks at the flower, the way the bee looks at the flower, the way you look at the flower, and the way you look at the flower under psychedelics, right? Why we're so inclined to say that the first three, the bat, the bee, the normal you, appropriately represents the flower is that you're able to, in intricate ways, represent it and interact with it, right? So if it tastes bitter to you, that might be a sign that it's no good for eating, right? If it looks a certain way to a bee, it might be a reason to avoid that flower versus another flower. The way you represent a flower can also, you can then write that down along with many different ways of representing flowers. And so that those kinds of representations can just form a whole book and interact with other books, and you can start building more knowledge. So that's why I have this bit on here of not just interacting with the environment, but your representations have to interact with other representations. And my suggestion here is that it's not clear how, at least at the perceptual level, psychedelic experiences can reach this level of interaction with the environment. I'm not saying they don't, but I'm just saying that it doesn't seem that so clear that they do. Okay, so here's what I'll concede on Dr. Moen's view. Psychedelic perceptions may not be distortions, but they might not meet a high bar for knowledge, right? But now, remember something I covered in a different video, and that's that there's, regarding to knowledge, there's many different levels and many different levels of justification. So maybe even if we don't admit psychedelic experiences into the level of perceptual knowledge, grounded knowledge, that we still have a lot of ground to cover in regards to memory, reason, testimony, and introspection. Okay, are psychedelic drugs distorting? All right, hopefully you have a better response. Hopefully now you have a better understanding of what I think went wrong with this Redditor's comment, and you have a better grip on the main idea.